Thank you for being here this afternoon. Thank you to Professor Marco Bonomo, who is talking about the Brazilian experience. I'm going to introduce him by mentioning some aspects of his curriculum. He is a PhD in economics from Princeton University. He's currently professor of economics and director of the Center for Finance at INSPER, associate fellow for the CAIREQ. What all this means? All right. Member of the Latin American Standing Committee of the Econometric Society, director of the Brazilian Econometric Society, member of CODACE, that is the Business Cycle Dating Committee of Brazil, from the Institute of Economics of Brazil, hosted by the Getulio Vargas Foundation, and member of the Brazilian Securities Exchange Commission. Also, he's member of the Behavioral Studies Nucleus. He was a founder and president of the Brazilian Finance Society and president of the Brazilian Econometric Society. His research interest is in macroeconomics, asset pricing, and the Brazilian economy. He was visiting distinguished Lehman professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, associate dean of research and research degree programs at INSPER. Previously, from joining the INSPER, he was associate professor at EPGE, FGB Association and assistant professor at the PUC Rio. PUC Rio. Okay. Thank you, Professor Bonomo, for being here.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Pablo, for the kind introduction. So it's a pleasure to be here to talk about the Brazilian experience. And so I kind of chose to present what I think that could be useful for you guys in Mexico in thinking of how to create a committee and how it should work. About the technical aspects about forecasting and like Marcelli and other people who are like econometricians have a much more important contribution than I could do. So I will focus more on the committee itself and how it works, how it was founded, and so on. Yeah. First, I will talk. My presentation will have three topics. The first one about how the committee was created. The second, how the committee works. And the third, I will talk a little bit about the Brazilian cycles that we dated. Of course, there will be some concluding remarks. And so FGV stands for Getúlio Vargas Foundation. Getúlio Vargas Foundation is a very important institution in Brazil. It was created in the 50s by the government, although it's a non-profit organization, private. And in the beginning, they were producing the national accounts and a lot of statistics. And after that, IBGE, that's the Brazilian Statistical Institute, starting to produce the national accounts. And but Getúlio Vargas and has this part of Getúlio Vargas called the Economic Institute, the IBRI, the one that was responsible for the economic statistics. And also they are very active in analyzing, producing statistics, especially in macroeconomics, and analyzing statistics. And it will be important for the context that I will tell you also that Getúlio Vargas Foundation started with this Economic Institute, but during the time it was like they building course. They have graduate and undergraduate teaching in business economics, law, social science, mathematics, international relations, and also has academic research. And also it was the first graduate course in economics in Brazil was from Getúlio Vargas Foundation. So I already talked about IBRI. And then in 2004, Getúlio Vargas decided to create this business cycle dating committee, and there was kind of ordinance 52/2004 of like a law. I almost put it, but was in Portuguese like the act of creation of the CODACE, and established the following. It's linked to IBRI, to this economic institute. It should be composed by nationally renowned professionals, recognized by the technical and analytical expertise, and regardless of their academic or professional affiliation. Should have 7 members, including its chair, and will decide by majority voting. Members and chair should be chosen by the IBRI's, this institute, director. And their mandate, they have no fixed mandate, the same as in Canada. And the following tasks would be attributed to their members. Specifically, the chair should call the meetings, announce the results, and designate 1 member to be responsible for the reports. And the other members should participate in the meetings, any decisions by voting or other method. And then it's a continuation. And the meetings, everything in this page, have no defined periodicity, will be limited to a maximum of 2 in 12-month period. And the first meeting will decide about the business cycle dates of the last decades. Almost 5 years later, May 20, 2009, the director of IBRI, as was supposed to be done, appointed the members and the chair. And also, in this act of the IBRI, they appointed IBRI's vice director, Wagner Ardeu, and the adjoining superintendent of business cycle, Aloysio Campelo, to provide, that's very important in the way we function, logistic support for the committee's operation, and follow the work to be developed by the committee, and participate in all meetings, but without voting right. It's very important to have the comment on this. No, it's very important to have. Well, first, it's very important that it is an institution like Getúlio Vargas hosting the committee, because the institution has a lot of credibility in the country. Second aspect, it's very important to have an institute like IBRI that where they have a big macro group to provide the logistic support for the committee's operation. So every meeting, they prepare the meeting and bring a lot of statistics, a lot of things that they use to produce themselves, and they produce things especially for our meetings. The composition, now we talk about the composition of CODACE. I put the age when CODACE started. Now CODACE is 10 years old, so everybody has 10 years more than what I put there. That Afonso Pastore is a chair. So let's just explain something about that I think you should be careful when you choose a committee, the composition. Although Getúlio Vargas has all this part of the Economic Institute that produce economic statistics, also Getúlio Vargas has this graduate school of economics, EPGE, the one I was part of. He could not pronounce the name, it's a very traditional school of economics. But there are other traditional schools in economics in Brazil. So, and Afonso Pastore, who was a former professor, and the other rival institution with a lot of importance in Brazil was PUC-Rio. I belonged to both, and I was in PUC-Rio, moved to Getúlio Vargas. There are a lot of competition between two. So to get credibility and not generate jealousy, it's important in the composition that you pay attention to those details. And I think they were very skillful, where they appointed Afonso Pastore, a very respected, renowned. Oh, the thing not working. Someone could try to unlock, and I could still continue to talk a little bit. To have Afonso Pastore, who is a very renowned macroeconomist, recognized by everybody. He's not from PUC, he's not from Getúlio Vargas, a former professor at USP, in fact, at the University of São Paulo, another important university in Brazil, and former president of the central bank. And he has a very good, in his generation, was a very technical guy with a lot of very strong econometrics background, and an active consultant. That means that he is doing the on time, trying to forecasting things with the data and what's happening with the Brazilian economy, the data, and active in doing those things. So I put the members in the alphabetic order by the first name as they put in Codassi, but the second name that you appear there is Dionísio Dias Carneiro, who was 6'3" at the time, was one of the founders of the PUC school. So that's the thing I'm mentioning. Also a macroeconomist and an active consultant. The third one was João Victor Isler, who is a professor at Getúlio Vargas. Well, I think now the screen showing something different from this screen. I don't know what's going on. Here is solved, but not there. Yeah. But I cannot change the page. And, it's not only this page. Is that...
They are fixing there.
Yeah, okay. And then João Isler is a guy, academic researcher in time series and forecasting. And then there is Marcel, that we will not talk anything about Marcel. You know Marcel very well, very academic researcher in macroeconomic time series, like a specialist in the team. By now, myself, that I am researching macroeconomics and finance, as was my introductions. And at that time, I was a professor at Getúlio Vargas, former at PUC and now at INSPER. And then Paulo Pichetti is an applied researcher in econometrics linked to IBE, to this institute, who was 46. And Regis Bonelli was 66. Regis Bonelli, in my opinion, was probably the guy who knew better Brazilian statistics of anybody. And he was kind of one of the founders of IPE, the Research Institute of the Government, former director of the IBGE, the Statistical Institute. And his research was mainly about only Brazilian economy, Brazilian growth all his life. And he knew a lot about that. And at the time, he was a researcher at IBRE. He was retired from former jobs. And unfortunately, he's not anymore with us. He died 2 years ago. And then he was replaced in 2011 by Edmar Baixa. Edmar Baixa who was 67 at the time, was one of the most important Latin American economists, specialized in Latin American economists, together with Carlos Diaz Alejandro, with some people who studied at the old times Latin America, and also one of the founders of PUC. So Dionísio Dias Carneiro, one of the founders of PUC, died, and he was replaced by Edmar Baixa, one of the founders of PUC. In that way, this thing was never explicitly talked. I have to talk about the composition. I start to realize how this thing worked so well. One of the things is the composition. In this aspect, to have representatives of the several schools, people who were very known and respected in Brazil, and to have a mix, a balanced composition in other aspects. There are a good number, like there were 3 specialists in time series and forecasting, 3 active academic researchers, and people who were working only with the Brazilian economy, not doing like top academic research, but actively involved in trying to forecast what's going on in Brazil and know all Brazilian data very well. So all this mix, I think we have a complementarity between the people and a very good balanced composition. And then my next topic would be to describe the 12 meetings that we had. The first meeting, so as was scheduled, in the first meeting we should date all the turning points in the last decade. So the first meeting was in May 2009, and from 1980 to 2008, we did quarterly dating of the turning points of this period. This is officially is one meeting, but now I was talking to Marcelo, remembering this. This was a really long meeting. Yes, okay. This was really a very long meeting. I think maybe we had more than one day meeting, and this continued to, and then we dated the things that everybody would agree were more obviously, and we continued discussing by email for dating the things that we were in doubt, and there were some disagreement, and we finally concluded this dating, and we issued our first dating report. And then in December 2009, what we did, we dated from 1980 to 2008. So in 2009, we were in the recession. There was the crisis, and we already dated the start of the recession. In the second dating, then we started dating like more current things. Current, always dating the past, but with a smaller interval. Then we dated first quarter of 2009 as a trough, marking the end of the 2008-2009 recession. And then what we do in the third, in red, will be always meetings that date something. So the third meeting also we dated something. We did the monthly dating of all the things that we have dated quarterly before. And then we have what we do when we don't date. We do the presentations about the methodology of the presentation of the statistics, talking about the current, how the things are going in Brazil, how it looks like. It looks how the economy is doing well, is not doing well. Look at all the indicators and all this discussion about the current things. Eventually, there are some new monthly indicators that appears, and then we discuss and compare the monthly indicators. The GDP in Brazil is only quarterly, as most everywhere. And there were a lot of monthly statistics about the level of activity. And then in the other meetings, we saw presentations in discussion about the dating algorithms, applying this to the informative series that we have in Brazil. And then the next meeting, presentations about leading and coincident indicators, and discussion about the recent low growth and high volatility. In 2014, we started a recession, but there were some indicators that something was not going so well, but still, and then there was some pressure in September 2014 for dating the current recession. We received, not only in the election time, we received all the time when there is evidence of some variation in the cycle. The press call us all the time, and then we did this meeting, and then we concluded, and since the pressure was too big, normally I think we would not do anything, we decided to issue a statement that we didn't have enough information about for dating like a peak, the beginning of recession. Yes, there was elections. In fact, there was election 2 months or 1 month later. So it was 1 month before election, a lot of pressure. But even without elections, you usually have. And then in 2015, we dated finally, July 2015, we arrived at the conclusion there was enough information. And then we dated a peak in the first quarter of 2014, marking the start of the, not current, but the last recent recession. And then another meeting presenting dating series using algorithms, dating of series. And then October 2017, we dated a trough in the first quarter of 2016, marking the end of 2014-16 recession. I also remember that this meeting was a meeting that we took some time for convergency. Some people thought that we didn't still have enough information, that the information that the recession has ended. Some other people thought, okay, no, there was enough evidence that the recession has ended. Finally, this opinion prevailed, and we dated the end of the recession. And then we have the last meeting that we had just in July now. We had a discussion about the slow recovery that we had since the recession. Then there will be another meeting scheduled, but was canceled for November, for the end of this month, to discuss this slow recovery. And what do we learn from these things? No? From the 12 meetings, we have 5 meetings that led to dating, 2 meetings that discussed the datings but did not arrive at a conclusion, and remaining 5 meetings where we had no discussion at all about identifying the recent turning points, just discussing methodological issues, update of recent Brazilian economy evolution. And that's about what is discussed in the meetings. About the intervals, what we learned exposed is that the meetings tend to be once a year when there is not obviously an obvious thing to date, and then discussion about recent developments and methodology. And when you have press to date things, we do twice a year until we don't think there is no pressure to date anything, and then we go back to the once a year rhythm. And how are the dating meetings? How they are conducted? I will not enter in too much details because the report that we issued does not have much details, and I don't think that's appropriate to enter in too much details. But I think what's relevant in terms of methodology of how the meeting works, I think is here. It's prepared by IBRI, as I say, with the possible help of the members specialized in forecasting, in backcasting. For example, Marcele, João Isler, and Paulo Piquete, very often they contribute to the preparation of the meeting, bringing something for the meeting. The application, that's especially relevant in the beginning when we have to date a lot of things. So when the meeting started, we have already using those dating algorithms, Bry Boscher, Mark Watson version of it, Monch, Ulig, Markov switching, tree-based learning, machine learning. Those are algorithms that we use to have like some, well, the algorithms are dating. We have already a picture of, according to some algorithm, what would be the business cycle for the last 20 or 30 years. And then we start to discuss each possible turning point. And also, and then it's very, as it was said here, we use an NBR type of approach, and we look at the relevant time series. I put here a list of time series that appears in the reports, in the preparations of the meetings. That usually are series related to the GDP. GDP is quarterly, like monthly series, but also we have some decomposition of the GDP and also of those indicators by sectors to see what is going on, and then we compare, you know, and when we are in doubt about something, we look at several series and see if there is a strong indication of the turning point or not. Most often, so then we have the discussion about the turning points with support of the information given by the algorithms and the additional data. And most often, a conclusion was reached by consensus. And what types of the conclusions we could reach? There was a peak in some quarter or month. There was a trough in some quarter or month. Or there is not enough information to conclude that there was a turning point. Now I will present to you the results of our dates. Marcel already presented very shortly, but first to give you a little bit of background about, and it's something that came to my mind when this discussion about growth and NBR cycles that are really GDP negative growth. When you have a GDP negative growth, usually at a recession that we are dating this traditional method, it's usually as a result of a crisis, no? Like a slower growth for a long time could be some, or slower than average could be maybe some structural thing. But when we are dating cycles, I think we are talking about different objects. When we are dating recessions, like that, not only slower growth, like GDP contraction. Usually those things are a result of some type of crisis. And then when I look, when I decided to plug that, I put some pointers here for what was happening. All the things were crises, were not really a variation that suddenly nobody knows, oh no, we are growing a little bit less. No, it's not this thing. It's really a big recession crisis. So, we starting dating the 80s, the first recession that we date, Brazilian had during the 70s, until the end of the 70s, Brazil was the fastest growing country in the world, like competing with Japan. If we start the date for the beginning of the 20th century until 1980. That was called especially in the 70s, Brazil grew a lot, was called the Brazilian miracle. And then we have a balance of payment crisis that led to hyperinflation. And as a result of this balance of payment crisis, and we didn't have any reserves. We have really to contract the economy. It was a policy act because there was no other way. And then after that, the economy recovers from 2083. So we start to recover and grow until 87. And then from 87 to 91, the inflation was going more and more. We have a big hyperinflation, and there were several failed stabilization attempts. And those we have kind of, you will see in this period, we have kind of short periods of recession and growth, corresponding to several types of failed stabilization attempts. Stabilization attempts of the type of like freezing price, usually, not traditional stabilization attempts. And then in 94, finally, we have a successful stabilization, and our hyperinflation ended forever. And but in the beginning, I was even surprised. This is a very short recession that I didn't remember anymore. That in 95 we have a very short recession, but was you to blame, guys. Was a Mexican was the Mexican crisis. And then, but Brazil, when stabilized in 94, in the beginning we have a fixed exchange rate regime. And then, you know, with a fixed exchange rate regime, if you don't have too much reserves, any international crisis is going to be your crisis as a consequence. So then we have after the Mexican crisis, we have the Asian crisis, the Russian crisis, everything caused recessions in Brazil. Which finally led to a floating exchange rate in 99. And then, like in 2001, we have a different type of recession because we had a crisis in our electrical system. We have power outage, and our electricity was not enough for the country, and we have rationing, and then this led to a recession. Also, there was an Argentina crisis at the end of the year. And then the next recession is going to correspond to the election of Lula. Everybody believed that Lula would not honor the debt, that we have like a default on the debt, and this led to a big crisis in Brazil, lack of investment. But then when Lula showed that he was continuing the policies of Cardoso, we started a very long period of growth in Brazil from 2002. You see, there is like from 2003 until 2014, we have only the global financial crisis that affected us, but only a little bit. You see how little it was in Brazil. But we have, if you cut the global financial crisis, we have, that was mild in Brazil, we have a very large period of growth in Brazil, although not like high growth as in the past, but continuous growth. Now, this is the picture that Marcelo already showed, and in every shadowed area there correspond to our dating. This is our first, our quarterly dating. There are some interesting things. For example, you see that in the first recession, there was a small recovery in the middle, and then the recession continued. There is always this issue when we have a recovery in the middle that appears in Spain and that appears in Europe, but the European Dating Committee dated as a whole recession. Spain dated as 2 recessions with a break in the middle. The first one we dated as a full recession. The second one we dated as a recovery in the middle, but I think it's because of this growth rate, although it was like for 2 quarters, was a very high growth. We could not like say that this was a continuation of the recession. And the first one was, the first recovery in the middle here was more mild. And then we have those things here, yeah. Some episodes, those crises that appear, international crisis that has a reflex in Brazil. And then it's interesting to look at 2008, 2009 crisis, for example. Here is a very interesting, see what's the length of the recession of Brazil? Was 2 quarters, it's very little. We have like a very pronounced recession, but it was not very pronounced in level of employment, very pronounced in GDP, because employment has some lag. And then after that, you see how the recovery was with a very strong growth. And then what we call from 2014 to now, to 2017, this very long recession that has nothing to do with any international crisis, was our self-made recession by very strong mistakes in policy, macro policy, micro policy, every type of policy that you could imagine was conducted in the wrong way. And then we have that as a result. I hope that you don't do as Dilma did, Dilma Rousseff, our president, that caused this. And then we have in this table we have the whole chronology, but we have in numbers duration, amplitude, what is the duration and amplitude of recessions and of expansions, and of course reading one by one, like we are now not like I envy Steve that we had few dates to present and then he could get into details. I could not really go into details with so many dates. I think because they have a shorter span, but because it's Canada and here is Brazil. No? As Marcelo was talking about emerging countries that have too much more bumps in the middle. And then, but we could like, and at the end, we did the monthly chronology, here appearing, a detail, an interesting detail, or weird detail, that we did the monthly chronology for all dates, with the exception of the last recession, that we disagreed in the monthly chronology, and then we arrived at a conclusion that was better just to date the quarter, not the month, that we didn't have enough information for be sure that was, some indicators gave 1 month, some indicators gave another month. If you look, it was not very difficult to say it was this month. I don't know that in the future we are going to be like that with our monthly dating, but only this period, the quarter, or if we'll continue quarter from here on, or if you finally decide on those dates in terms of monthly, there is some uncertainty. So, but what are the features of the Brazilian cycles? So, the average duration of Brazilian cycles are a little bit more than 4 years. Peak to peak, 50 months. Trough to trough, 53 months. 4 years, 53 is more 4 years and a half. But between 4 years and 4 years and a half. Average durations, of course, recessions continue to be shorter than booms as everywhere. Average duration of recession, 18.7 months. Average duration of Brazilian booms is 34.4 months. The longest recessions were 2. One already dated in months, was the first 89 to 91. Oh, I didn't mention because 80s was, I mentioned that 80s was this period where we have a lot of stabilization plans that were not like traditional stabilization plans that were not working. But we have one very radical one in 90 that gave rise to this very long recession. That was where the assets were frozen. So suddenly, all the money that everybody had, you could not take the money out. And only a little bit. Like only pocket money, very small. This caused immediately, well, the country was already started a recession a little bit before, but then this recession became very, very deep. Inflation decreased for some time, but then it went up again after some time. So that was the first very long recession caused by a disastrous kind of stabilization plan. Our second very long recession was also caused by disastrous policies. That was the last one. So our longer recessions were not the ones that were caused by external crises that we suffered from the external crisis, were the ones of the self-made crisis. And you see, like, when you see a country like Argentina that is in recession since the 1930s, as a cause caused by really they don't know how to govern themselves. They cannot blame anybody else outside Argentina for their fate. And the longest boom was the one that preceded the last recession. Even there was a global financial crisis in the middle. Otherwise, we would have had much longer. But because even from there was 114 months. The largest GDP loss recession was a balance of payment crisis in the beginning of the 80s with minus. There were two ties. The last recession that we have minus 8.6% of decrease in GDP. A little bit, almost tied with the balance of payment crisis that we had at the beginning of 80s. This crisis had in other countries as well. So finally, I think this is my last slide before the conclusion. A little bit about, or my last two slides, or the last topic, is about the communication. How do we communicate? We issue a report, and in the report, what is in this report? I think it's a little bit shorter than the NBR report. It has the date of the meeting, the turning point detected, a brief description of GDP variation, and the time interval between the last two turning points. A table like the ones that I just showed, one of them I got from the report, in the last report, with all the turning points and time intervals. A graph also as the one I showed, with the GDP growth evolution and the recession shaded. And then especially when there is some longer interval between the datings, a brief explanation about the committee, what's the objective of the committees, dating cycles, the NBR types, and so on, and the list of the committee members. But how is this issued? Well, so there is always a press wants to know when is this going to happen. We announce a date and time for the press release, and one or more members of the CODACI become in charge of talking to the press. And then at the same time that it's released, the members of CODACI, one or two members, they will talk to the press together at IBRI with the official divulgation. But of course, each member of CODACI after that could talk to the press and give his or her own version or opinion about, or if you want to analyze, for example, one of the things, why do we want also not only time series guys, but we want macroeconomists like myself in the committee? Because we want to discuss the mechanisms, because discussing the mechanisms, the macro mechanism that how the things work sometimes help to understand and helps to date. And then, of course, when we date, we don't see what was the cause, and maybe some members of CODACI, each one could even have different opinions about that. They could talk to the press in their own name. Final comments. First, some lessons just about communication. Resist pressures from the press to prematurely date events. That's a very important, I think, advice. And to have rules, since there's a pressure, is not only in the community, but the pressure is on each individual member. So we should have rules for the members communicating to the press. Our rule, I think, has been working well, is that, as I told, the dating communication should be done officially to the release of the report. And aside for this circumstance, any member could talk in his or her name at any time. Brasilia, and finally, is something that I was discussing in the coffee break. How do I think? I was asked, how do I think if this thing is working well or not? I think it's working very well. Why? What's the measure of the success of this? When I go to the Brazilian econometrics meeting, I see sometimes serious guys seeing if their model is good or not, if they date according to our dating. So it became a reference to the press, to the econometricians, to practitioners, to everybody in the country. Nobody ever questioned our dating. It seems that, and then I think that CODACE has been accomplished the objective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bonomo. Indeed, in Latin America, a region historically prone to dramatic economic crisis, it is more common to associate recessions to balance of payments, banking, or currency crisis, and also to external debt defaults instead of thinking about them as a phase of a regular pattern of rise and fall of economic activity, that thing that we call business cycle, that modern economists experience. As it was mentioned in the morning, a general aim of this seminar is to learn from the experience of some of the existing business cycle dating committees about their structure, organization, and functioning to fulfill their main objective. We have been talking about the definitions of the business cycles, so methodologies, and the data needed to date turning points and then to identify the phases of expansion and recession. And now you have done a great presentation about the experience of CODACE, the Business Cycle Dating Committee of Brazil. And you have talked about many different aspects, like the meetings, the characteristics of the members, etc. I would like to ask you many questions, but time is ruthless, especially now. We have only a few minutes. But I would like to ask you to go on some particular points. For example, according to what we have said before in this seminar, sometimes it is not clear what the committee is established for. I mean, in the case of Brazil, what is your recollection? What were the reasons to create the committee at that particular time, given that this committee follows more or less the rules of the MBER, and this was and the committee in the United States was established in 1978, and this committee is created at the end of last decade. Why at that time? And also, you mentioned that the members of the committee are very well recognized economists, but of course there are many good economists in Brazil. But why these are the members of the committee? What are their characteristics, their special background to become members of the committee? And finally, something you talk about at the end of your presentation, but beyond the academic research, what has been the impact of this work of the committee? I mean, in terms of economic policy or the decisions of firms. Other questions about other topics we'll talk in the breaks or around. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo. About the timing, like it was created, you see, there was like the president of Getúlio Vargas issued this first act in 2004, but the second act to create CODACE would depend on the IBRIS director. And the IBRIS director waited until 2009 to effectively appoint the members and create the thing. I think, thinking now, of course, a lot of things. Now I look back and I arrive to some conclusion as the composition about schools. I never thought about that. So, but thinking now, in 2009, we had this recession that was started in Brazil. In fact, the last quarter of 2008, or it was the peak in the last quarter of 2008. It was obvious that something was going on. There was a big crisis all over the world, and there was some impact in the Brazilian economy. So that's a time that we, I think, or create a committee when there is nothing to date. Of course, there was the past. We had the first vision to date in the past. They could start the committee in 2004. We did the past, and then we will wait 5 more years until we have something else to date. But I think when we had something to date that was very recent, that was probably a trigger of let's put this committee to work. About the components of CODACE, I think we have a good balance. I think we should have a good number of academic economists. I think is important. I think we should have a good number of people who really know all the data, the country data, very well and deal with this. I think we should have some members of CODACE that are all the time following all the details and doing the forecasting of what's going to happen. For example, now in Mexico, are we in recession or not? Even though nobody would risk to tell, but someone must be thinking about that, looking at the data carefully all the time. We are full time looking at all the data. So we have this mix of people. Could be other people, could be, of course. We are not the only people available, and there will be always a discretion from someone who appoints the members from when the decision is made to appoint the members. Some degree of discretion is going to, there will be. But the important thing is not specifically that there are deterministic names that must be those names, but to think about the balance of the composition of the group. And the impact in the real world, I think I see here that some people have expectations about when they talk about recession watching, to have like immediate impact. And of course, people who are working in banks, who are doing real actual investments in the economy or bringing money, they really need to have immediate assessment of the current situation. But I don't think that a committee like that would fulfill this role. If the committee would fulfill this role, it will impair the other role, because there is a big possibility that you fail in this assessment, and then you take out the credibility. The credibility that I told you that our datings are referenced, are used, never was questioned. That maybe it would be natural to question the dating, but I never heard any questioning of the dates we did. I think it was accomplished because we do the things exposed with a lot of, when we really have a lot of indications, very strong indications, that there was a turning point in the past. We cannot do the same thing in the present. So we cannot, unfortunately, we cannot be so socially useful for guiding current investments now. But the datings that we do, when we study the datings, when you study the cycles, it helps to have a vision of the world, to diagnose. Maybe will help to develop better policies. We develop academic work help to develop better policy. I believe in that. I don't believe that I'm academic economist only by having fun with some nice, beautiful models that don't serve anything. Even if immediately appears that's not doing anything, academic work, it will end like having an impact, like basic science. But it's even more because it's applied.
We have time for a few questions, maybe one or two, maybe two questions. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation, very interesting. And I would like to know if your chart that you mentioned that you created is public, or if not, if it's possible to get a copy of that chart.
Which the chart of the datings?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, they are in our reports, but if you email me, I could send you, because I translated into English for the presentation here.
Great, that will be great.
But is what I'm telling you, just to be clear, that those things are public. And if you go to the site of CODACE, that's inside the page of the IBRI, there will be the reports, and inside the reports there are charts like that. But you just send me an email. You just talk to me later on.
You said that it's not needed for the presentation. So the
Portuguese is to understand in Spanish.
No, I'm just curious. So all information is made public only in Brazilian?
In Portuguese, yes.
Sorry?
Yes.
Only?
Yeah.
And after we had the whole days for the whole 30 years we did English, but that is.
So wouldn't you think
Brazil is a very self-centered country, so.
No, but
if you look at the Brazilian discussion groups, nobody talks anything other than Brazilian economy, Brazilian politics, and it's very self-centered, unfortunately.
But I'm surprised because, precisely for research purposes, you are one of the few countries that do have an authority for already 10 years with a scientific systematic dating. I see the interest.
No, but I think if there is demand, we will have. We were happy here to be in Mexico to see that there is demand. The first time I heard that they want to listen about what we have doing in Brazil. Yeah, no, we should do this. Thanks.
Yes, Gerardo, please. Yeah, right.
Thank you very much. It's just a question about the rule for decisions of the committee. So in one of your first slides, if I remember well, you said that the rule is majority voting.
Yeah.
But in practice, what you showed us is that you have always decided by consensus.
Yeah,
the idea of majority voting,
reach by consensus is better.
Yeah,
but we could. I'm not sure that at the end, I think most of it was by consensus. But when we know what's the majority, we don't need to vote. No? Then I remember some disagreements, especially in the last dating. And at the end, we arrived at the dating, but it could be just the minority people. Okay, we agree with you that we should issue and that we didn't need to vote. The fact that usually we don't vote, but if it's needed in our rules, that we could vote.
Yeah, because the point is that if you have to vote, is that you don't agree. Not everybody thinks the same. Not everybody is looking at the same month as the turning point. And why not waiting for having more information instead of having to vote?
No, but sometimes when we did, for example, we did this quarter dating at the end for the last thing. But sometimes, for example, if you are dating some point back in the past, maybe we will never have any new information about that. Either you date or don't date. I think when you date quarters, I think the disagreement is much lower. It's easier to date quarter than to date month. When we date month, and sometimes like it's really the indicators are between 2 months. Maybe a month is like it's created by the man, no? You know that could be in the middle, no? And then the indicators appear one and another. It's very hard. I think so. Disagreements in this case, I think, are normal because even someone to decide based on the information is difficult. I think usually we wait, and that's why there was this meeting that we issued this report that we didn't have enough information to arrive to this conclusion when we think that this is the case.
I would like to know if the rules that you operate under are something that you decided as the committee along the way, or was it something set by the IBRE, for example, like the communication policies or etc.? Did you decide them, or was something that somebody else decided for you?
No.
Thank you.
Getúlio Vargas and IBRE created CODACE already with some rules. Okay? But other than that, the rule was the communication is decided by the chair. And in fact, what happens is that the chair, since IBRE operationally is very important, the chair, together with IBRE, in fact, the communication, we always discuss that there was never like an issue about the communication. Like in the meeting, the communications, we decide it's going to be like that. But there is some detail that we are not there to decide the detail. The chair decides with IBRE. But the chair is the chair, has power and a lot of respect. He's very stubborn guy, so it's very difficult to do something against his will.
Yeah, thank you, Marco. One simple question: what things would you suggest that would improve the work of CODECE?
I think we should have. We're talking now at lunch because this makes us think we should have and then that's something that a question that I pose for the other committees because people have not talked much about this. Maybe for the discussion tomorrow, should we have one thing is to have the written report, but outside the written report, should we have some written minutes of the meeting? Maybe if they are only for our use. I want sometimes to recall some information, and after 10 years, there are things that I don't remember very well. I try to, Marcel, do you remember that? And if we had the minutes, we could remember. That would be useful. But in other way, like the minutes should be for us or should be public, like Eva talk about transparency. Everything should be transparent. The meeting, and then, so I pose this discussion, but for our use, I think, I don't know what are the other consequences of this, but for our use, it would be useful to have the minutes.
Do you just want to say about the Skype versus in person? I think that's very important.
You want to talk? You want to mention? Okay. Another thing that at some point we for commodity of the members, we start to do some meetings like we have like 3 members in São Paulo, 3 members in Rio. And we had 3 members in São Paulo, 3 members in Rio, and Marcele in US. Marcel is a more difficult case, but we used to have the meetings, like we would fly the people from São Paulo to Rio. They have the meetings in Rio, the 6 of us, and Marcel, when she is in Brazil, she will go, but otherwise she participates by Skype. But then at some point, we start to have the meetings like the IBRE also has a unit in São Paulo, by conference call between IBRE in São Paulo, IBRE in Rio. And I think this created some noise in the communication. That's communication nowadays, it's very important. I think nowadays we communicate a lot through Skype and do meetings by Skype. We work with co-authors by Skype. But to be present, especially in decisions that could be a little bit more complicated, it makes a difference. And I think it tends like people, we feel that we in São Paulo, we communicated to each other much better than with the people in Rio. And then it tends to create some disagreement, but maybe the disagreement just because like we are talking to each other more in São Paulo than the people in Rio talk to each other, and we get two groups with different opinions just because of this. At the end, we solve and we arrive at the consensus. But I remember that one of the meetings, I had this impression, and then we decided that we are. So the last meeting we did in Rio, and the chair, who was a little bit more reluctant to travel to São Paulo, I think he realized that, and also he said that he would travel to Rio, and he has been, and then we have been traveling to Rio to do the meetings.
Thank you very much, Professor Bonomo. Just let me say that you have then two homeworks. One, to write the story of CODACE from the very beginning, and the other to translate all the information about the date in business cycles of Brazil. Thank you very much.